Now, while it may not seem like it today, winter is just around the corner. Cold temperatures, snow, just more extreme conditions are around the corner. So today, we're going to talk about tents and break down the real difference between a 3-season tent and a 4-season tent or an all-season tent. I'll explain what I mean by that here in a minute, but you might be able to get away with using your already owned 3-season backpacking tent and not have to get a 4-season tent. But in some cases, this might be the better choice. So let's talk about it. So this tent here that we're using as an example for a 3-season tent is the Slingfin 2-Lite. This is a semi-freestanding double wall tent that has all of the attributes that you would be looking for in a 3-season tent. So what are those? The first is this is going to focus on trying to be as lightweight as possible, typically using much lighter weight fabrics like a 10 or 15 or 20 denier nylon fabric for the fly sheet and similarly for the tent body. You are also going to have lighter weight pole structures. You're going to have a lot of mesh on the inner body of the tent. That is going to promote as much ventilation opportunity as possible so that you reduce condensation. And because you're likely going to be using this in the summer months, it's going to help you sleep a bit cooler and not overheat and not trap so much hot air inside of the tent and just make for a more comfortable sleeping experience that way. But then also, speaking of the ventilation of the tent, the fly sheet typically does not come all the way to the ground and touch the ground because it is trying to promote air movement through the tent, through the mesh body, and out the vents to reduce that condensation. The next thing that you'll find on a 3-season tent is a reduction in the amount of guy lines that the tents use in their design. Now that's going to be dependent on whether that's a fully freestanding, semi-freestanding, or a trekking pole tent. A trekking pole tent typically will have more guy lines because it requires more tension to be able to get a good tight pitch. But it's not going to be at the level that we see on this Nortent Vern that we'll talk about here in just a minute. Those guy lines on a 3-season tent are going to help stabilize in pretty moderate winds, but they're not designed to take huge loads or be at an expedition level like in the Himalaya where you've just got gusty, crazy winds. It's just to provide a little bit of support, and this is also not necessarily going to handle any kind of snow load. Maybe a really light sprinkle of snow and it sloughs off and everything. But if I have a heavy snow come down on top of this, this is not the ideal option for that. Now I want to pause real quick and just give a huge thanks to Garage Grown Gear for supporting my channel and sponsoring this video today. Garage Grown is simply in the business to help backpackers have a better experience in the backcountry. They are a one-stop shop for hard to find gear items, unique gear items, everything cottage gear related that solves problems for backpackers. And you don't have to go searching all over the place to find these things. They're in one place, and I love that aspect of Garage Grown. They just help backpackers have a better time out on their backpacking trips. So I've got some links down in the description for some unique and cool tent accessories since we're talking about tents today, but there's a bunch of other really cool things that you can get from Garage Grown, and I thank them for supporting my channel. But now with a 4-season tent, things get a bit more specific in the design to make it capable of handling pretty extreme weather conditions. This is the Nortent Vern 1. That's a really cool and interesting tent design. Now, I will point out that I think that this tent is more of an all-season tent, and I'll explain that here a bit more in a second. But the biggest thing to understand about a 4-season tent, in my opinion, is not that you would use a 4-season tent in all 4 seasons, but more that it is a winter extreme weather condition tent where I'm taking it out to be in really heavy rain, really extreme winds, as well as alpine environments, mountain environments, and handling potential snow load where there is a bunch of snow coming down on top of the tent. And those attributes are an important thing to understand because this tent is really designed to handle those extreme weather conditions. Just look at the stability of this tent, especially compared to the sling fin and just that 3-season tent in general. This is going to handle really intense winds. You have all sorts of guy lines coming off. In fact, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 guy lines that are attached to this to make it just handle any kind of really gusty winds, some intense weather. And that's what makes this a more enjoyable, more comfortable, and just, I guess, a safer place to be when you are in those kinds of situations. Now, where I think this tent is more of an all-season tent as opposed to like a mountain expedition tent where you're gonna have a bunch of snow load is down here on this panel of the tent. It does come to a V, and you could have enough snow load come down on this pretty low profile part of the tent and the poles collapse in like that and just reduce the internal space. Ideally, a tent is not going to collapse in any way when you have a substantial amount of snow come down on it. But this tent is very, very structurally sound. It's a very strong tent, and those guy lines definitely support the ability for this to handle those pretty extreme gusty winds and such. And what is also key with it is the guy lines are not just attached to the fly sheet that wraps around the pole with a piece of Velcro, which can just rip out from really gusty stuff. The guy lines are sewn into a structural seam, and then this tent specifically gives you an extra wrap of the material before the actual line that allows you to wrap that around the pole, which on this tent, the pole structure is totally on the outside of the tent, which does aid in the ability to make it really strong. But being able to wrap the guy line around the pole and then tension it just makes the entire structure that much more strong for those conditions you would find yourself in. Now, you'll notice with the inner of the tent as well, compared to the sling fin, it's a solid piece of fabric. It is a breathable piece of fabric, but the big difference with that is that's going to contain more warmth in the sleeping area, and it just simply makes it more comfortable in there and for you to sleep warmer during the night because you're not losing all of your heat out of the mesh. And because this is double walled, condensation still is not a huge thing for you to be concerned about. And then notice that the body of the tent comes all the way down to the ground. So it's there to just eliminate the amount of warmth from the inside of the tent that's escaping to the out, but also keeping cold from getting in. It's a really, really smart design, but you still have plenty of ventilation opportunity with the tent to help reduce the amount of condensation that can collect from a warm body inside of the tent and really cold temperatures outside. Now, something that's pretty unique about this tent is this is designed to be able to take a double pull set. So right now I've just got one pull set, but all of the clips and everything with the pull sleeves at the bottom and such are designed to be able to take a second set of pulls to just increase the overall strength of this tent. Now, a 4-season tent is not something that I'm going to look at as wanting to be this ultralight, super, super light piece of gear. Like, it needs to provide protection, and a tent design like that that allows for it to be that much stronger is really cool to see. Now, another attribute that's important to understand about a 4-season tent that would be more specific to like expedition tents is the amount of vestibule space that can be attached to it. Very often you'll see a pretty large vestibule that in some cases is almost as large as the actual sleeping area of the tent. But when you're out in alpine settings on mountains and such, you are going to have just ripping, gusty winds. And vestibules are designed to be a place to get out of that wind and have a place to cook, have a place to get changed, and not bring all of that cold, wet gear to the inside of your sleeping area. And that's pretty dang cool. But it does also present the issue of the amount of bulk that you're carrying, how much extra weight it is. But that's going to be a totally different experience if you are taking a full-on expedition tent out into the mountains. You're probably doing some kind of big deal climb or hike and that kind of thing, where something like this Nortent is just more of an all-season kind of approach, where I can trust this to handle really crazy weather conditions. And because the pole structure of the tent is a bit larger as well, it's just going to be beefier and be able to handle all of those crazy things that you might experience. I hope that my repetitive nature of just talking about how much this can handle makes sense, but it's important to define that contrast between what you see from the 3-season tent here and what this tent provides, to help you understand whether or not you actually need to go with a tent like this, or if a 3-season tent is sufficient for still enjoying some time out in the snow. So what is that distinction? When do I need to make that decision of going from a 3-season to a full 4-season tent for the trips that I'm going on? And you just have to simply ask yourself a few questions. The first is, am I going to be experiencing really heavy snow wherever I'm going, whatever trip I'm going on? If I am going to have snow load, can my tent that I am using handle all of that weight? Is the pole structure and the design of the tent going to be able to handle the weight of the snow, it piling up down onto the sides? Is the vestibule going to collapse? Is it going to potentially cause any damage to my tent? And if that is the case, then I need to look at something that can handle that, because the pole structure, the geometry of the tent allows for it to handle that. Now, there are really cool 3-season tents out there that have pole structures that can handle a lot of weight on top of them, and that is cool. But then you have to ask yourself, am I going to be warm enough? Do I need something that has better protection with a solid inner, with a fly sheet that goes all the way to the ground, so that I can sleep warmer? And that's an important question to ask, but it's also doubled with having a good winter sleep system, having a really good insulated pad underneath you, but then also a good sleeping bag that is rated for those temperatures and being able to sleep in those temperatures. Very often, I've taken a 3-season tent out in the winter. There's no snow in the forecast, and it's roughly 20 degrees Fahrenheit to maybe into single digits, and I've still used a 3-season tent no problem, because I'm not going to be experiencing pretty crazy conditions. I don't anticipate snow, I don't anticipate crazy winds or anything that is outside of it just being cold. And so if that's the case, then I can still go have a really good, fun experience by using a 3-season tent and not having to invest. It just comes down to, what are the conditions that I'm going to be in? What am I going to experience? And do I need the shelter that is going to protect me in those crazy conditions that I would find myself in? If that is the case, then absolutely invest into a 4-season tent or an all-season tent option that adds more warmth, that adds more protection, gives you more confidence to get a good warm night of sleep and just enjoy yourself more. So those are my differences between a 4-season and a 3-season tent. Let me know down in the comments what other things you would add to this discussion of why you would choose a 3-season tent for winter camping or a 4-season tent for winter camping, and whether or not you think you need a 4-season tent for your specific needs. Thanks for watching today, guys. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. I hope you have an awesome day. We'll catch you in the next one. See you later.